Is
You were
this
given a
some kind
direct
of
order,
joke?
Lieutenant.
The guard's
An order
voice
you
was
chose
sharp,
to ignore.
soaked with disdain
This is
as it cut across the
insubordination.
stillness of the morning. He stood rigid at the grand entrance to Arlington National Cemetery, his arms crossed, his dress uniform immaculate. To him, the old man before him was nothing more than an inconvenience, a mistake that needed clearing away before the motorcade arrived. The old man was Samuel Hayes, 86 years old. His frame was bent by time, his shoulders stooped, his skin a parchment of deep wrinkles and age spots. He wore a dark suit, clean but threadbare at the cuffs, the only suit he owned. His shoes were scuffed, polished as best as his tired hands could manage. Despite his frailty, he carried himself with a strange steadiness, his back refusing to yield entirely. His eyes, pale blue and unwavering, were fixed beyond the gate, on the rolling hills dotted with headstones and flags at half-mast. Another guard, younger still, smirked at his partner's words. Together they formed a wall, a human barricade between Samuel and the place he had come to honor. "Sir," the first guard said with theatrical impatience, "this is a private funeral for General Wallace. Invitation only. Credentials, please, or you'll need to leave." Samuel did not flinch. He had waded through storms, through battles, through nights that never seemed to end. A few more minutes of insults would not undo him. He stood in silence, his presence a quiet rebuke against their arrogance. Cars began to arrive, sleek black sedans with government plates, their passengers stepping out in black suits and dresses, politicians, high-ranking officers, family members. Some glanced curiously at the standoff, their whispers a hum beneath the morning breeze. They saw only an elderly man being denied entry, too old, too ordinary to belong among the elite. The younger guard sighed, his tone dripping with condescension. "Look, Grandpa, I don't have time for this. The motorcade's almost here. If you're looking to visit a grave, the public entrance is down the road. Now, are you going to move along, or do we have to make you?" Samuel's voice, when it finally came, was soft, but it carried weight. "I'm here for the general," he said simply. "He would have wanted me here." The guards exchanged a glance, smirks curling at their mouths. "You and the general?" one said mockingly. "Sure, and I'm the Secretary of Defense. Names don't mean anything without the paperwork, old man." He jabbed a finger against Samuel's chest. "You've got no medals, no ribbons, nothing to prove who you are. As far as I'm concerned, you're just a civilian, trespassing at a state funeral." The insult hung in the air. Around them, the crowd of mourners grew thicker, their eyes flicking back and forth, pity mixing with annoyance. To them, Samuel Hayes was just an intruder, a relic clinging to memories no one cared to acknowledge. But Samuel knew better. His proof was not on his lapel, not polished into neat rows of brass and ribbon. His proof was carved into his bones, carried in scars and memories that still woke him in the night. He had no paper invitation, no decoration to show. What he had was a bond forged in blood decades ago, one that no guard at a gate could ever erase. And so, the second guard, Corporal Jennings, stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. He was young, his posture stiff with the eagerness of someone desperate to prove authority. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying a forced sharpness, "you're creating a security problem. This is a state funeral. If you don't leave, we'll have to detain you." Samuel Hayes did not blink. His pale blue eyes remained fixed on the green slope beyond the gates, where flags swayed gently in the wind. His silence only seemed to aggravate Jennings, who turned to his partner with a grin. "Probably wandered away from the nursing home," he muttered, loud enough for Samuel to hear. The insult didn't draw a reaction. Samuel's hands, knotted with age, rested quietly at his sides. Yet beneath the surface, memory stirred. He had been insulted before. He had been underestimated, dismissed, forgotten. He had lived a lifetime in the shadow of such judgments. But never had he expected to meet them here, at the threshold of Arlington, on the day he came to say goodbye. The motorcade was arriving now, long black sedans with tinted windows sliding into position. Mourners, politicians, generals, and family members stepped out, adjusting their black suits and dresses. Their eyes fell on the standoff, whispers curling like smoke through the crowd. To them, Samuel was just an obstacle, a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jennings's voice grew louder, fueled by their attention. "You hear me, old man? This isn't your playground. If you want to pay respects, use the public entrance down the road. But this is invitation only." At last, Samuel spoke, his voice steady and low. "My name is Samuel Hayes," he said. "Just tell them I'm here." Jennings let out a short laugh, mocking and theatrical. "Samuel Hayes, and I'm the Secretary of Defense. Names mean nothing without paperwork." He jabbed a gloved finger at Samuel's chest. "Where are your medals? Where's your uniform? You've got nothing. As far as I'm concerned, you're a trespasser." The word echoed like a gavel strike. Trespasser. A junior officer, a fresh-faced lieutenant with bars too new for his shoulders, strode over from a nearby checkpoint, drawn by the commotion. "What's the holdup?" he asked. "Sir," Corporal Jennings said, snapping to attention, "this man refuses to leave. Claims he was a friend of General Wallace. No invitation. No credentials." The lieutenant turned his eyes to Samuel. He studied the old man's frayed suit, his scuffed shoes, the absence of ribbons or rank. His decision was swift. "Sir," he said coldly, "you are disrupting a military ceremony. Leave now, or you'll be arrested." Samuel's patience, vast as the ocean, was beginning to wear thin. His voice remained even, but there was an edge now. "I'm not leaving." The lieutenant stiffened. "Then you are under arrest for trespassing. Corporal, escort him out. If he resists, cuff him." The two guards moved closer, hands reaching for Samuel's arms. A ripple passed through the onlookers, a gasp of dismay at the sight of an old man being manhandled at the gates of Arlington. Samuel didn't resist. He simply shifted slightly, and as he did, a small piece of metal on his lapel caught the light. It was no bigger than a coin, tarnished and crooked, its shape irregular, almost ugly. Jennings noticed it and sneered. "What's this? Some trinket from a cereal box?" He reached out and flicked it with his finger. The instant contact was made, the world shifted. For Samuel, the manicured lawns of Arlington dissolved. The sunlight vanished, replaced by choking jungle rain and the metallic stench of blood. He was back in Vietnam, 1968. Screams of wounded men filled his ears. A banyan tree had collapsed, pinning a young captain beneath its branches. That captain's name was David Wallace. His bloodied hands trembled as he pressed a jagged shard of shrapnel into Samuel's palm. "Keep this," Wallace had rasped. "It's not official, but it means more than any medal. It means you were there. It means you saved us." The vision shattered, leaving Samuel back at the gate. Jennings was still smirking, unaware of the weight of what he had touched. But in Samuel's eyes, a new fire glowed, a flicker of a long-buried ember. The guards tightened their grip, beginning to drag him toward a waiting vehicle. Some in the crowd shook their heads in pity. Others looked away, embarrassed, but not everyone. At the edge of the gathering stood a young Army captain named Daniel Cooper. He had served 2 tours overseas. He recognized the stillness in Samuel's stance, the unshakable calm that only true combat veterans carried. He knew instinctively that something was deeply wrong. Direct intervention would cost him his career, but silence would cost him his conscience. Quietly, Captain Cooper pulled his phone from his pocket. Turning away, he shielded the screen and typed a single message to a number known only to a few. "Colonel Markinson. Urgent. Man detained at Arlington Gate. Name: Samuel Hayes. Wearing a tarnished pin. Looks like shrapnel. Claims he knew General Wallace. Please confirm." He hit send, his pulse racing. It was a long shot, a whisper into a storm. But sometimes, a whisper was all it took to start an avalanche. Inside a command tent 100 yards from the ceremonial grounds, Colonel Markinson was hunched over maps and radio chatter when his phone buzzed. His aide started to dismiss it, But the colonel caught the sender's name, Captain Cooper, and read the message himself. At first, his brow furrowed in irritation. But as his eyes moved to the final line's tarnished pin, "Looks like shrapnel, name Samuel Hayes," the color drained from his face. The phone slipped from his fingers and clattered on the desk. His aide rushed forward. "Sir, is everything wrong?" Markinson's voice came out hoarse. "Get me General Peters. Now." Within moments, the radio crackled, and the voice of General Michael Peters, the 4-star overseeing the funeral, cut through. "Markinson, you're pulling me off the reviewing stand for this? It had better be urgent." Markinson's reply was tight, every syllable laced with urgency. "General, we have a Shepherd protocol. The man at the gate, it's him. It's Samuel Hayes." The radio went dead for 3 long seconds. Then Peters's voice returned, stripped of all ceremony. "Halt everything. I'm on my way." At the cemetery gates, Lieutenant Jennings was savoring his hollow victory. His men had Samuel by the arms, dragging him toward a security vehicle. The lieutenant smirked as he stepped closer, delivering one final insult. "Last chance, old man. Walk away with your pride, or spend the general's funeral in a holding cell. With your delusions, you're a danger to yourself and everyone else." Samuel's expression didn't break, but his silence was no longer that of patience. It was the silence of endurance, stretched to its limits. Then came a sound, low at first, then swelling a rumble of engines cresting the hill. Heads turned as a motorcade of 3 black Suburbans raced toward the gate, gravel spitting from their tires. They screeched to a halt, doors flying open in perfect synchronicity. Out stepped not military police, but 6 men in immaculate army dress blues, their chests heavy with ribbons and medals. Colonel Markinson was first, his face hard with controlled fury. Then the rear door of the lead vehicle opened, and silence blanketed the crowd. General Michael Peters emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, his 4 stars gleamed in the morning Sunday. The air itself seemed to still, the whispers of the crowd dying instantly. Even the wind through the cemetery's trees seemed to pause. Jennings and his men froze, their hands falling away from Samuel as if the frail old man had suddenly become untouchable. Peters didn't glance at the guards. His storm-gray eyes scanned the scene until they locked on Samuel Hayes. His entire bearing changed in an instant. The commanding aura melted, replaced by something deeper reverence. He walked past Jennings, past the frozen lieutenant, past the stunned mourners, every step deliberate. The click of his boots was the only sound in the world. He stopped, 3 feet, in front of Samuel. And then, with absolute precision, General Peters drew himself to full attention and snapped a salute so sharp it seemed to slice the air. "Mr. Hayes, it is an honor, sir." The gasp that rippled through the mourners was collective, like a wave breaking. Soldiers instinctively straightened, some already raising their hands in return salute. The lieutenant's face drained of blood. Samuel blinked, then slowly pushed himself upright, freeing his shoulders from the hands that had held him. His cardigan sagged, his shoes were scuffed, but in that moment, he stood taller than anyone else present. He met Peters's eyes, and for the first time, he spoke words heavy with memory. "Michael." The use of his first name was not lost on anyone. The general lowered his salute slowly, his face open, almost tender. "Ladies and gentlemen," Peters's voice carried across the gates, ringing with authority. "You look at this man and see only age, a civilian in a worn suit. But I tell you now, this is the Shepherd, a man whose name never made the history books, but whose actions carved history itself." The crowd murmured. The name passed in whispers, the Shepherd. For years it had been battlefield folklore, a ghost story told by old veterans. General Peters pressed on, his baritone steady and strong. In the spring of 1968, when General Wallace was just a captain, he and a dozen men were shot down deep in enemy territory, surrounded, outnumbered, doomed. And on the 3rd night, through mud and fire and enemy lines, One man came for them. He carried half of them out on his back. That man was Samuel Hayes. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. The tarnished pin on his lapel is not junk. It is a piece of shrapnel that should have ended Captain Wallace's life. Instead, Samuel Hayes threw himself on top of him, taking the blast. Wallace himself forged that pin and gave it to Hayes, calling it the Medal of Shepherds. It is the only one of its kind. And it is worth more than every ribbon on my chest. By now, soldiers and officers alike were saluting. Even civilians placed hands over their hearts. Some wept openly. General Peters turned his gaze, sharp as a blade, onto Jennings, Davis, and the young lieutenant. His voice dropped to a lethal calm. You demanded his invitation. Every stone in this cemetery is his invitation. You asked for his proof of service. The scars on his body are his proof. You stood in the presence of a Titan and saw nothing but a trespasser. The lieutenant's face collapsed under the weight of the rebuke. Jennings swallowed hard, his arrogance gone. Samuel raised a weathered hand, placing it gently on Peters's sleeve. His voice was soft, but it carried. They're just boys, Michael, doing their duty the only way they knew how. Let it be. Peters exhaled, his fury cooling under that quiet dignity. He nodded slowly. Samuel turned his gaze to the lieutenant, and instead of anger, his eyes held something deeper. Wisdom. Son, he said, that uniform doesn't grant respect on its own. It's a promise. Respect is earned by how you treat others, especially those you don't understand. Remember that. The lieutenant swallowed, unable to answer. And with that, the tide turned completely. The guards who once pushed Samuel back now stepped aside. The crowd, once skeptical, now parted like water, clearing a path through the gates. General Peters gestured, "Come with me, Mr. Hayes." And as the old man walked into Arlington, the people lining his path rose to their feet, hands lifted in salute, not to a general, not to a politician, but to an old shepherd who had once carried his brothers out of hell. The cemetery had fallen into a hush so profound that even the rustling leaves seemed muted. Behind them, the guards who only moments before had manhandled him stood frozen, faces pale, their confidence shattered. General Peters halted, turning sharply back toward the lieutenant and his two corporals. His expression was unreadable, but his words struck with surgical precision. You demanded this man's credentials. You mocked him in front of mourners. You put your hands on a legend. His voice rose, not in volume, but in weight. That failure of judgment disgraces your uniforms. Jennings shifted uneasily, trying to keep his composure, but his hands trembled. The lieutenant attempted to answer, "General, we were only following protocol." Protocol without discernment is cowardice, Peters cut in, his eyes narrowing. Your orders are to protect this sacred ground, not desecrate it with arrogance. The rebuke landed like a blow. The lieutenant looked ready to collapse. Then Samuel, standing just ahead, raised a hand gently. His voice, though soft, silenced even Peters. Michael, enough. They're boys. They will learn. The general hesitated, then inclined his head. As you wish, Shepherd. But Peters was not finished with the lesson. He gestured toward the young officers. Report to my aide. You will give him your names, your units. Tomorrow morning, 0600 hours, you will be at my office in the Pentagon. There, you will learn the true meaning of respect. Do I make myself clear? Yes, General, the three stammered, their voices hollow. The crowd remained still, every mourner witnessing a reckoning they would never forget. For years to come, they would recall the day the arrogance of youth was crushed by the silent dignity of an old man. Samuel turned slightly, meeting the lieutenant's eyes. There was no malice there, only a profound gravity. Son, he said evenly, I know you thought you were protecting something important. But this place, he gestured, toward the endless rows of headstones, this belongs to every man and woman who served. You don't always see their medals. Sometimes the proof is carried here. He tapped his chest. Sometimes it's a memory that never fades. That's enough. The lieutenant swallowed hard, eyes glistening, unable to answer. By now, the mourners had begun to shift. Word was spreading through the crowd. The old man at the gate was not a trespasser, but the shepherd, the man who had carried David Wallace out of a jungle alive. Soldiers began to rise from their seats near the ceremonial ground. One by one, they lifted their hands in salute. It was not ordered. It was instinct. Soon the entire crowd, officers, civilians, Wallace's grieving family, was standing in solemn tribute, a spontaneous wave of respect that needed no command. For Samuel Hayes, it was humbling. He had never sought recognition. He had lived quietly, his past carried like a burden, not a trophy. Yet here, in this sacred place, the truth had risen despite him, and though he did not crave it, he accepted it not for himself, but for the men who had never come home. General Peters placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's time," he said gently. Together, they walked toward the front row reserved for Wallace's family. As they passed, heads bowed, hats lowered, and hands pressed to hearts. Samuel's steps were slow, but in that moment, each one felt as though he was carrying the weight of generations. Behind them, Jennings and the others remained rooted in place, their shame complete. Their punishment would not be dishonorable discharge. Samuel's mercy would not allow it. Instead, they would carry the lesson in their service, a scar, invisible but permanent. The day had shifted. What began as humiliation had become vindication, not through rage or retaliation, but through the quiet authority of lived sacrifice. Samuel Hayes had not spoken loudly, had not demanded recognition, yet his presence had silenced a cemetery, corrected arrogance, and reminded a nation what true valor looks like. The service for General Wallace began under a heavy sky, yet the weight in the air had little to do with weather. At the very front row, seated among the grieving family, was Samuel Hayes. General Peters himself had escorted him there, ensuring the man once mocked at the gates now sat where he belonged, honored, visible, undeniable. Throughout the ceremony, Samuel remained still, his pale blue eyes fixed on the flag-draped casket. His expression was not pride nor triumph, but something quieter, grief, remembrance, and a profound fulfillment of duty. He had come not for recognition, but to keep a promise made decades ago in the mud of a jungle to stand by David Wallace one last time. When the rifles fired their salute and the bugle's lonely notes of taps floated across the hills, Samuel closed his eyes. The sound carried him back to nights, filled with rotor wash, to faces young and brave, some never to return. He felt them all standing with him, unseen but present. Afterward, family members approached, embracing him with tears in their eyes. They had heard whispers of the shepherd for years, but now, standing before them, he was real. "Thank you," Wallace's daughter whispered, gripping his weathered hand. "You gave us 50 more years with him." Samuel simply nodded. Words would never be enough. The incident at the gate spread quickly. Within weeks, training across the armed forces included a new case study, the Hayes Protocol, a lesson in humility, discernment, and respect. Young recruits were taught to look beyond uniforms, beyond appearances, to recognize that true valor does not always announce itself. Months later, on a rainy afternoon, the young lieutenant who had once ordered Samuel arrested spotted him in a quiet diner. His arrogance was gone, replaced by humility. He placed money beside Samuel's coffee cup and whispered, "For the coffee, sir, and for the lesson, thank you." Samuel looked up, offered a small smile, and gave the young man a nod. That was enough. For Samuel Hayes, life returned to its quiet rhythm, tending his garden, meeting old friends for coffee, walking with the weight of memories only he could carry. He asked for nothing, sought nothing, except to live in peace. His story reminds us that the greatest heroes are often the ones who ask the least. They wear no medals on their chests, but their courage is written in scars, silence, and the lives they saved. Respect, Samuel had shown, is not given by rank or robe or regulation. It is earned one act of integrity at a time.